If you don't have a strong stomach, you're probably not gonna like this one. It does get pretty gross. Pressuring her like, you should find a husband, you should find a real career. I don't read manga other than this series. What is up, guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today I have a very exciting one. I'm announcing this challenge that I'm doing on my channel where I'm going to read a book from every country. I'm going back through all of my old reading journals and finding out what I've read so far. I'm hoping that by reading stories from other countries, from other perspectives, it can kind of get me out of this Western box of thinking. There's so much about like other cultures that's just so beautiful and can kind of expand your mind a little bit. So that is why I'm going to be doing this challenge. And you guys let me know if you have any translated works that you have read that you think I might enjoy. So the first country we're going to talk about is Argentina, and I read Tender as the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica. I could totally be butchering her last name, and it is about this future imagined world where we have started consuming human flesh. So it's about cannibalism, but it's very similar to the way that the agricultural system currently works. Instead of eating cow, we're eating humans. They're very much systemically like raised and butchered in basically the same way. You can go to the grocery store and buy like a foot that's like wrapped up in plastic the same way that you would go and buy like a hunk of cow meat. So we're following Marcus. He's the main character, and he's kind of one of the only people who seems to still be disturbed by this. Everybody around him, everybody else in society has kind of just naturally shifted into this mindset. He's kind of the moral compass of the story. He's battling a lot internally. I believe his son may have just passed away, so he's got some grief there. He's got a father with dementia. There's a lot going on in his personal life, and it's kind of reflected in his outer life. So he works at one of these processing plants. So he's very up close and personal with all the violence that happens. The author does a really phenomenal job of weaving these very like tender human moments in with the carnage that you're reading about. I would say if you don't have a strong stomach, you're probably not gonna like this one. It does get pretty gross. Definitely falls under the horror category, so I would say proceed with caution if that is not a typical genre that you enjoy. But this was a 5 stars, and I'm not a rereader, but I would reread this one for sure. The next country is Barbados. So I want to talk about Cherie Jones's How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House. Love that title. That is the first thing that intrigued me. We have a main character. Her name is Lala, and Lala is newly fallen pregnant. She's got a significant other. I don't remember if he's boyfriend, husband. His name is Aiden. He is not really good father material or husband material. It's a very quiet, sad novel, if that's kind of your thing. Definitely trigger warnings for a lot of different things. I think I wrote down domestic abuse, murder, sexual assault, gun violence. If you like a heavy, dark read, I know some people that's kind of their thing. Lots of themes of like death and grief and violence, like the female body and violence and how those things can collide. This is one of those like family bonds, generational trauma kind of stories. I know there's a lot of popular books like that deal with like generational trauma. It's one of those books that if you are just in the mood for something tragic, then this is the book for you. All right, next up is France. So I have 2 that I want to talk about. The first one is science fiction. That's I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. This one's quite short. So we open with a underground bunker type situation, and there's a whole bunch of women who are being watched. There's a couple of guards who are all men, but they're not really supposed to speak to them. We don't know why they're there. They have no idea what time it is, what day it is, even I think what year it is. There's a lot in here about the need to speak. And how that kind of separates us from the animals. That's it's a very human need. It's a very slow learning and unfolding of like why they're there and what happens. In their 12th year in this cell, an alarm sounds and they're actually able to get out, and they emerge into this world that it's very post-apocalyptic. They don't really know what happened, but clearly there was some major world event. On their search for civilization and other people, they do come across other bunkers. The main character is living quite a bleak existence because they're just sort of on this never-ending journey to try to find some remnant of civilization. But her ignorance of everything and about the world kind of keeps her going, and it's almost a positive, like it's like ignorance is bliss. The narrator is what does it for me. She's just so inquisitive, and so I felt like she's really what kept us going, like her spirit. And her willingness to just keep going. You do have this burning question the whole time of like, why are they there? What's going on? It is one of those books with an ending that might not satisfy all because it doesn't really answer those questions. And then the second one, translated from the French, is Simone de Beauvoir's The Woman Destroyed. Also really loved this one. I read this one more recently. So in this one we have 3 short stories that are interconnected but can also be read separately. We've got a couple of stories in here about fraught marriages and the willingness of a woman to keep that marriage going. Although in the title story, the main character is definitely fantasizing about just leaving, getting in the car and going. There's a lot in here about infidelity. One of the quotes in here I really liked is she says, "All women think they are different. They all think there are some things that will never happen to them, and they are all wrong." So she's kind of talking about all the things that are going to affect you as a woman, all the things you're going to experience. Even if you think you are untouchable, that they are going to happen to you at some point. I was not a big fan of like the existentialist movement and the themes that kind of come out of that, just the vibe of it. Not a big fan of like everything being a crisis, and that is how she writes this. So if you think that's not something you will like, you might not particularly enjoy this one. It's one of those books you don't necessarily read for the plot or the stories themselves. You kind of read for those little moments, those little nuggets of insight. Women in crisis is kind of how you could summarize this one. So I think I did give this one 4 out of 5 stars. Next country is Ghana. So for Ghana, I read Gyasi's Homegoing. This one had its moment online. It definitely had a lot of hype. She's got a couple other books as well that are very, very popular. This is the only one by her that I have read. I loved and struggled with the format, the way that it's written. It's like each chapter we're jumping to a different generation, and so I loved being able to see all of that. Like there's so much time encapsulated in like a relatively short book, but at the same time I also felt like I couldn't really put my feet on the ground because we were just going, you know, you're tumbling through it so fast. Again, if you are into those like generational stories and seeing a lot of different, you know, family members, it's a fascinating concept because I feel like we've all wondered, like I have Scottish and Irish, I think, on my dad's side, and the Native American ancestors on my mom's side, and so it's really fascinating to think about, like, if I think 10 generations back or even like 5 generations back, what kind of lives were those people living to make me, like, to get me here. It's fascinating to think about. So I do love the concept. I just felt like I'm the type of person I really need to like be somewhere for a while in order to kind of get into the flow of it, and I felt like we were moving really quickly. So if you do like a story that moves very quickly, then you'll probably like this one. Next is Japan. I have a couple for Japan. The first one I want to talk about is Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This is again another one that kind of really had a moment on the internet. I feel like the main character is neurodivergent. She's got a very particular way of like speaking and interacting with people that's kind of like adjacent to the way neurotypical people interact with each other socially. Just a theory, I don't really know. Her name is Kiko. So the whole thing here, the whole like struggle, is the fact that she's not striving for more. She's very like complacent, just working at this, what's basically like the equivalent of like a Walgreens, I guess. She's just this sales clerk in Tokyo. She doesn't really want marriage, she doesn't really want kids, and she's just totally content, and it just blows the minds of her family and friends. They just can't possibly understand how that could be enough. Everybody's pressuring her like, you should find a husband, you should find a real career. It's kind of all about her trying to kind of bend over backwards to please people who just can't be happy for her. It's super short. I really liked it. It's just kind of a little slice of life of, you know, this kind of oddball woman. So it's kind of documenting her struggles with that. So I think I gave this one 5 stars. I really liked this one. And then I have to mention also for Japan, manga series, The Girl from the Other Side. So I don't read manga other than this series. Back when I worked at the bookstore, this was like 2020, something like that. I remember shelving reading this particular series and seeing the cover art and thinking it looked so different from a lot of the like typical cartoony kind of manga that you see. I loved the style. I remember flipping through the book and being like, I think I'm gonna read these. Like, it's not really my thing. Like, you read them backwards. I remember thinking it was kind of odd. I love the pairing of these two individuals. You've got Sheba, who's the little girl. I think she's supposed to be of indeterminate age. I'm not totally sure. She could literally be like 3 or she could be 10. I'm not really sure. She's just very small and adorable. And then you have, I don't remember what they call him. He's like this monster. He looks like this like devil figure, Slender Man type of guy, but he's her protector. So it's actually very sweet. I believe she's left alone for some reason, and so he comes along and they kind of just end up in each other's lives, and you know, she needs a caretaker because she's a literal child, and so he becomes kind of a father figure. I would say if you are at all hesitant, as I was, to read a manga just for the fact that it's a manga, this one's very different. The story is really beautiful. I would say, you know, get into it for the art and then you're gonna stay for the story because their interaction with each other is so sweet. Next country I want to talk about is Mozambique. The book is Sex at Dawn by, I don't even want to try to pronounce her name. I know I'm gonna butcher it. Is it like Casilda Yetha? I'm not totally sure. Because she's a practicing psychiatrist, she knows a lot about human psychology. It's actually co-written with her partner. I believe he's an anthropologist and she's a psychologist, so they combine their knowledge to write this book, and it's fascinating. So it'll definitely change if you've got a very Western view about relationships and marriage and monogamy. It's just interesting to consider another perspective. I remember years ago hearing about like polyamory and polygamy and thinking it's so bizarre, so weird. And then I read this book and I was like, oh, okay. There's actually biological reasons why polyamory works for some people. All about relationships. In the West, we have a very monogamous way of looking at things because of the rise of Christianity. That's just like the current norm of society. But it's really interesting to consider like other cultures and other tribes, and I just found it very, very fascinating. If anything, it's just, again, the whole purpose of this video and reading from other countries is just to get your mind out of the little box that you normally think in. So that one definitely pushed the boundaries on the concept of relationships and marriage and all of that. So that one was a 5-star read for me. Next up is Nigeria. This is the Wormwood trilogy by Tade Thompson. The first book is Rosewater, and it's like the setup, the introduction to this whole world. Basically, a dome, this like biodome, comes down onto a city in Nigeria. I think it's Lagos. I think it takes place in Lagos. And if you are within a certain perimeter of this dome, you can be healed of whatever ailment you may be suffering from. I feel like if you are a fan of like Jeff Vandermeer, the Southern Reach trilogy, I would say if you're a fan of like Vandermeer and that whole, it's that kind of vibe. I loved Rosewater the best. It's the first of the series of the trilogy. It gets very political in books 2 and 3. I was listening to the audiobook, I think on like 1.5 speed, to kind of get through some of that. It is a very like realistic way of approaching it because obviously the government's gonna get involved. They're gonna like try to shut it down. They're gonna try to, you know, take control of it. There's also this element of the plot that has to do with people who can communicate telepathically. I can't remember the details. They're a little bit hazy now. It's been quite a few years since I read it. This one is from a Nigerian author, but then it also takes place in Nigeria. I gave it 5 stars. So next up is Pakistan. I read Mohsin Hamid's Exit West. This is really cool concept. Basically, there are different doors throughout the world. If you go through them, it's like a portal to another country, another part of the world. The plot of this one revolves around a young couple. We have Saeed and Nadia, and they are trying to flee civil war, and they use this system of magical doors to escape. This one's definitely like fantasy, speculative fiction, and obviously the themes of like being a refugee, immigration, all of that, that's very much what it's about. Hamid has said before in interviews, because he was writing this in sort of the Trump era, it was like 2016, 2017. So he said he wrote the book as sort of a way for people to kind of look at the refugee crisis maybe through a different lens. I think it's really interesting the way it makes you think about borders. It's so odd sometimes to think about like the seemingly random way that some borders were made originally, and how it's very, Hamid talks about how it's he kind of brings up this idea that it's kind of unnatural. He's one of those people who thinks everybody should be a citizen of the world, right? Like you should be able to literally travel anywhere you want. I really love the traveling aspect as well. I think the first door they go through, they end up in Mykonos. So they end up in Greece for a little bit. They befriend some people there, some other refugees. They go through a door that leads them to London at one point. So we have the rise of dark London, which is sort of like ghetto London, basically. It's like where all the refugees are sort of crammed into. I believe they end up somewhere else. I won't spoil anything more about the plot, but it does make you think very differently about travel and borders and immigration and all of that. So I did give that one, I think 4 stars. Next up is one I'm going to mention very briefly. It doesn't really need a lot of description, but for Russia, I am choosing Lolita by Nabokov. This is beautifully disturbing. If you don't know, essentially a grown man starts a relationship with a minor. It's kind of all you need to know. So I'm counting it for Russia because Nabokov was born in Russia. Of his time, he was like considered like one of the best, most prolific writers in both Russian and English. I think that's the thing that makes this so famous, is just the writing is so incredibly beautiful, but then you're so disturbed by what's actually going on in the story. Humbert is our main character. He has such a beautiful way of writing about her and their relationship, and it's such a dichotomous feeling in your heart of like, wow, it's written so beautifully, it's such a beautiful story, but we have like one of the most unreliable, disgusting narrators. So there's like a deeply unsettling feeling that you get while reading it, knowing you're enjoying it. I mean, it doesn't really need an introduction, but there's my Russia. And then for the final one of this video, I'm going to talk about South Africa. So I read Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. I feel like in America we have such, like, our problems are very privileged problems to have, and reading a book like that kind of reminds me of like how privileged I am and was growing up. So essentially it's him documenting his childhood growing up in South Africa during the apartheid era. He had a white father, a German father, and then a black mother. So he was, during that time, literally, as a mixed race child, born a crime. A lot of people describe the book as sort of a, kind of an ode to his mom, because she grew up like in a hut with like 14 other people. He had an intensely religious upbringing with her. She was very devoutly religious. He was always going to some sort of different church. They would bounce around between different churches, different Bible studies. I remember he talks about like trying to combat some of the poverty that he was growing up on by selling bootlegged CDs or mixtapes or something. He was kind of this hustler, you know, he kind of had to be in order to, you know, kind of help his mom make ends meet. Again, a book like this is exactly why I'm doing this challenge. I love to really see the world through somebody else's eyes and get as close as you can to somebody else's lived experience. I have a lot of reading to do in order to be able to like keep up with this challenge and keep coming out with, I would like to do 1 video a month. We'll see how this goes. We'll see if I can keep up with it. Like I said, you guys give me recommendations for any books that are written from foreign authors, different translated works that you've read and loved. Definitely let me know, because I'm gonna need a lot of recommendations for this video. So thank you guys for watching if you made it this far, and I will see you in my next one. Bye guys.